My husband's 26-year-old daughter, fresh off a divorce she caused by cheating, came to us begging for a place to live. I took pity on her and agreed. The day she showed up to move in, she handed me a legal contract demanding I sign over a 50% stake in my house. She thought she had me cornered, but she had no idea that I was about to end her entire scheme with one single move. My life, at 44, had finally settled into a rhythm of comfortable, quiet joy. I'm married to a wonderful man, a kind and steady soul of 50, and we've just celebrated our first year of marriage. It's a second marriage for him, a detail that brings with it the complexities of a life lived before me. The most significant of these complexities is his daughter from that previous marriage, a 26-year-old woman named Katie. The story of Katie is a sad one, at least in its origins. My husband raised her entirely on his own, a single father navigating the treacherous waters of parenthood after his first wife passed away shortly after giving birth. Her death was the result of a pre-existing medical condition, a cruel twist of fate that was tragically exacerbated by the pregnancy. She never had the chance to hold her daughter, and my husband was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered world and build a new one for Katie. One would think that growing up with such a dedicated, grieving father would instill a deep sense of gratitude in a child, a maturity beyond her years. But life, as it so often does, took a different path with Katie. Instead of gratitude, she developed a deep and unshakable sense of entitlement. She blossomed into a selfish, demanding, and frankly, monstrous young woman whom very few people could stand to be around. It wasn't entirely my husband's fault. He truly did his best. The real architect of Katie's personality was her grandmother, my mother-in-law, Pamela. Pamela stepped in to help raise Katie, but her version of helping was to spoil her granddaughter beyond all reason. She was the textbook doting, overbearing grandmother, a woman who saw her granddaughter as a flawless angel who could do no wrong. Every whim was catered to, every tantrum was soothed with gifts, and every consequence was shielded from her. Pamela built a world for Katie where the sun rose and set on her desires, and in doing so, she created a brat of epic proportions. Katie moves through the world with the unearned confidence of someone who knows nothing about life, but is utterly convinced she knows everything. From the moment I entered the picture nearly 3 years ago, I tried, with genuine effort, to build a bridge to Katie. But she met every one of my attempts with a wrecking ball. In her mind, I was a stain on her family's perfect portrait. Her father, a man who had been single for decades, deserved someone better than me. The day he brought me home to meet his daughter and mother was a masterclass in passive aggression. Neither Katie nor Pamela was impressed, and they made it known not with words, but with icy glares, clipped responses, and an atmosphere so cold it could have frozen water. Over the next few years, that dynamic never wavered. They were never brave enough to voice their disdain to my face, but their behavior was a constant, screaming testament to their disapproval. It doesn't take a psychic to know when you're being despised. Thankfully, I've never been one to base my self-worth on the opinions of others. I made my initial overtures of friendship, but when it became clear my efforts were being thrown into a black hole of resentment, I simply stopped trying. I mirrored their energy. I was polite, distant, and utterly uninterested in winning them over. Pamela was the same. She viewed me as a temporary fixture, an unworthy placeholder in her son's life. In her eyes, he would always be destined for someone grander, someone more suitable. And perhaps he could do better. I'm not a supermodel or a CEO, but I am a good woman who loves her son deeply. And frankly, even if a literal queen had walked into his life, Katie and Pamela's toxic, possessive behavior would have likely sent her running for the hills. But he chose me. We fell in love. And the bare minimum they owed us was a shred of respect for his decision. That, it turned out, was asking far too much. About a year ago, when we gathered the family to announce our engagement, the facade of civility crumbled completely. Katie and Pamela didn't just disapprove. They went on the offensive, launching a full-scale campaign to tear us apart. Their efforts, of course, were futile, but the ugliness of their attack was something I will never forget. A few days after our announcement, Katie showed up at our house, unannounced, and looking like a storm cloud ready to burst. My husband and I were enjoying a quiet afternoon at home when she barreled in, her face contorted with rage. She unleashed a torrent of abuse at her father, screaming that he was selfishly destroying their family by marrying someone like me. I had to ask, "What exactly do you mean, Katie? Someone like me?" Her response was a venomous diatribe. I was, apparently, a woman of loose morals and questionable character. A gold digger. That was the accusation that truly stunned me. I had no idea where she had even concocted such a fantasy. I was, and still am, a completely independent woman. I've been a self-employed artist, working on commission, ever since I graduated from college. I'm self-taught, and I've worked tirelessly to build my career from the ground up. It wasn't easy at first, but I've carved out a successful niche for myself. I make a comfortable living, more than enough to support myself without ever needing to depend on a man for financial security. The idea that I was with her father for his money was not just insulting, it was laughably absurd. Her words were a disgusting low blow, and that was the day I drew a hard line in the sand. I told my husband, in no uncertain terms, that I could no longer have any contact with his daughter. He was heartbroken, but he agreed. He knew Katie had crossed a line from which there was no easy return. Disliking me was one thing, assassinating my character with baseless, cruel lies was another. He made the difficult decision to cut Katie off. He also went low contact with Pamela, though I couldn't bring myself to ask him to cut ties with his elderly mother completely. It just didn't feel right. So, in the weeks following our engagement, a new, fractured reality set in. We stopped speaking to Katie entirely. My husband would still visit Pamela, but he went alone. I wanted nothing to do with either of them. They had made their feelings crystal clear, so I was simply respecting their wishes by staying away. Unsurprisingly, neither of them was invited to our wedding. We weren't speaking to Katie, and Pamela had made a grand declaration that she would not attend a wedding where her precious granddaughter was not welcome. That suited me just fine. The day was beautiful, filled with love and laughter from the people who truly supported us. My husband seemed a little sad for a while, the absence of his only family casting a small shadow, but he moved past it. That was a year ago. A couple of months after we tied the knot, whispers started to reach us through the grapevine. Katie had gotten married. In secret. Apparently, she and her long-term college boyfriend had eloped just a few months before our own wedding, telling no one until after the fact. We weren't invited, of course. It was a small, private affair with just a handful of their friends. The news hit my husband like a punch to the gut. This was his only daughter, and she had gotten married without even telling him. She hadn't reached out, hadn't given him a chance to be a part of one of the most important days of her life. It broke his heart. I felt terrible for him. Despite everything, he still loved her. He even sent her a text, a simple message of congratulations, trying to extend an olive branch. She never responded. He tried to put on a brave face, telling me he was happy for her, that he knew her new husband was a good man who would take care of her. We'd get sporadic updates from mutual acquaintances. They had bought a house. They seemed happy. My husband decided to respect her silence and maintain his distance. I have to admit, if Katie had reached out then, with even a hint of remorse, I think I would have been willing to forgive her. But she didn't. The silence stretched on, and we moved on with our lives. Then, about a week ago, my phone rang. It was Pamela. The reason for her call was shocking. Katie and her husband were getting a divorce. It had only been a year. The divorce, Pamela explained, had been in the works for several months, and now that the mandatory waiting period in Colorado was over, it was final. And in the settlement, Katie had lost the house. It was, by all accounts, a fair outcome. Katie, it turned out, was the one who had cheated. She had been carrying on an emotional affair with a coworker, exchanging intimate messages and confessing her feelings for him. Her defense, which she would later repeat to us, was that because it never got physical, it didn't count as real cheating. The naivety, the sheer stupidity of a 26-year-old woman throwing away her marriage over such a flimsy justification was appalling. But the consequences were very real. She had nowhere to go. Her ex-husband had the house, and the divorce had decimated her finances. Katie had always been a spendthrift, a woman with a complete lack of financial discipline. It was no surprise that the reality of supporting herself had driven her to the brink of bankruptcy. She needed a place to stay, Pamela explained. She couldn't afford rent and needed a few months to save up and get back on her feet. She needed our help. The conversation with Pamela was a precursor to a summit at her house a couple of weeks ago. My husband and I went, guardedly optimistic, but mostly wary. Katie was there, a shadow of her former arrogant self. After her ex had kicked her out, she had been staying with Pamela, but the commute to her job was long and difficult. Our house, conveniently, was much closer. And so, with her options dwindling, Katie had decided it was time to mend fences. She offered us a tearful, seemingly heartfelt apology. She confessed to having a massive ego, to being unable to handle the fact that I was an independent woman who didn't bend to her will. She spoke of a lifetime of being coddled by her father and grandmother, of having every need met, which had given her unrealistic expectations of the world. Her divorce, she claimed, had been a brutal wake-up call. She realized that not everyone was going to forgive her as easily as family, and she was terrified of losing us, too. She spoke of her love for her ex-husband, of the depression she was battling, of the pain of losing him due to her own foolishness. She begged us for one more chance to make things right. We were blindsided. It was a lot to process, and she was putting us on the spot. I told her honestly that I needed time. Her past behavior wasn't something I could just erase and forget. And even now, her apology was conveniently timed with her desperate need for a place to live. She swore her remorse was genuine, but I had my doubts. After a tense discussion, we agreed to take some time to think it over. In the meantime, her employer had agreed to let her work from home, so she could continue staying with Pamela. My husband and I were torn. We decided that before we could even consider letting her move in, we needed to see a real, sustained effort to build a normal relationship. For the next few weeks, Katie was a model of good behavior. She called, she texted, she was polite, respectful, and relentlessly charming. She was doing everything in her power to undo the damage she had caused. And I have to admit, for a little while, I started to believe it. I thought, just maybe, she was finally changing. When she brought up the subject of moving in again a few weeks later, after a long discussion with my husband, I agreed. He had been open to the idea from the start, patiently waiting for me to come around. When I finally gave my blessing, Katie was ecstatic. She called me, her voice filled with a joy that sounded genuine, and promised me that I wouldn't regret my decision. The next day, she arrived on our doorstep, her car packed to the brim with boxes and suitcases. My husband and I had both taken the day off work to help her settle in, to make her feel welcome. But before she even brought a single bag inside, she stopped on the porch, pulled a folder of documents from her purse, and said, with a disturbingly casual air, that we just needed to sign some paperwork before she could move in. We were completely bewildered. What possible paperwork could be needed for a temporary, informal living arrangement? My husband took the papers from her, and as we read through them, a cold, sickening dread washed over me. It was a legally binding contract, drawn up by a lawyer, and it stipulated that by allowing her to move in, we were agreeing to grant her a 50% ownership claim on our house. Our house. The home my husband and I had purchased together with our own money 2 years ago. A home that Katie had absolutely no financial or emotional connection to. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me breathless. I couldn't even form words. I handed the papers back to her, my hand trembling slightly. "Katie," I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, "what is this?" She shrugged, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Oh, it's just a little something my lawyer drew up. After what happened with my ex, I just want to make sure I have some security, that I can't just be kicked out." I was speechless. My husband stepped in, trying to de-escalate. He told her gently that this was completely unnecessary. It was a temporary arrangement. She herself had said she only needed a few months. All she needed to do was trust us. And that's when Katie, the true, unfiltered Katie, made her grand reappearance. She looked at her father and said, with a sickeningly sweet smile, "Oh, Daddy, I trust you completely. It's her I'm not so sure about." That was it. That was the final, unforgivable straw. She said she wouldn't set foot in our house unless we signed. Before my husband could even react, I felt a white-hot rage surge through me, so pure and so powerful it was almost calming. I decided, in that instant, that this was over. I looked at Katie, my face a mask of saccharine politeness. "Well, Katie," I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness, "since you clearly don't trust me enough to live under my roof, I think it's best you find someplace else to stay. Perhaps you can go back to Pamela's. You seem to be doing just fine there. You were right about one thing, though. You absolutely cannot trust me." And with that, I slammed the heavy oak door shut in her face. I fully expected my husband to be upset, to argue that I had gone too far. But when I turned to face him, his expression was a mixture of shock and grim acceptance. He knew, as well as I did, that she had crossed a line. We retreated to the living room, the sound of Katie's furious, hysterical screaming from the front porch echoing through the house. She wailed about how unfair I was being, how cruel, how heartless. I ignored it all. It took every ounce of my self-control not to march back out there and give her a piece of my mind she would never forget. Eventually, after her tantrum subsided, she left. The silence that descended on the house was a profound relief. We knew, however, that the battle was far from over. The repercussions began the very next day. Pamela called my husband and subjected him to an hour-long tirade, screaming that we had humiliated her granddaughter and that we needed to apologize and welcome her back immediately. My husband argued with her until he was blue in the face, but it was like reasoning with a brick wall. He eventually gave up and ended the call. He told me he had blocked both of their numbers. But they were persistent. When they could no longer reach us directly, they weaponized the rest of the family. My husband has never been particularly close with his extended family. They're a dramatic, gossipy bunch that he has always kept at arm's length. But suddenly, they all felt it was their place to weigh in on our domestic affairs. Our phones were inundated with texts and calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins we hadn't spoken to in years. The consensus was clear. I had grossly overreacted. I owed poor, traumatized Katie a massive apology. She was just a child, they said, a paranoid young woman who had just been cruelly kicked out of her home and couldn't be blamed for wanting a little security. We were being told to be more accommodating, more understanding of her fragile feelings. A child? She was 26 years old. And everyone seemed to be conveniently forgetting the rather pertinent detail that she had been kicked out of her house for cheating on her husband. In what universe does that not warrant being kicked out? The harassment was relentless, and it was directed primarily at me. For a moment, amidst the onslaught of criticism, I even started to question myself. But then the absurdity of it all would wash over me again. Was I the bad guy for refusing to sign over half of my house to my entitled stepdaughter? The answer was a resounding no. So, we made a decision. We sat down together and went through our contact lists, methodically blocking every single person who had contacted us on Katie's behalf. It was a mass exodus, a digital severing of ties. But when it was done, a quiet peace settled over us. We knew that somewhere out there, Katie and Pamela were likely incandescent with rage. But they had no way to reach us, and for the first time in a long time, we felt free. In the aftermath, my husband and I had a long, serious talk. He confessed that while he had always known Katie was spoiled, her entitlement had reached a level that even he, her father, could no longer stomach. He admitted to feeling a profound guilt, a sense that he was failing his only child by being so harsh with her. I held his hand and told him that giving in to her demands would be failing her. That would be no better than Pamela's coddling. By holding her accountable, by forcing her to face the consequences of her actions, he was giving her the only chance she had to grow into a better person. I told him that if I ever had children, I would want them to have a father exactly like him. That seemed to comfort him. We hoped, perhaps naively, that this would be the wake-up call Katie so desperately needed. A few days later, she and Pamela paid us another visit. I was working late at my studio that day, and I only saw them as they were leaving. I pulled into the driveway just as they were getting into their car, their faces stormy and upset. When I went inside, I found my husband sitting on the couch, his face flushed with anger. I knew instantly that there had been another confrontation. He told me they had contacted him on a new number, claiming they wanted to apologize and fix things. He had rushed home from work to meet them, hoping for a genuine reconciliation. But when they arrived, the apologies were nowhere to be found. Instead, Katie announced that she was ready to forgive him, but only on the condition that I was no longer in the picture. She had put up with me for long enough, she said, and I had no right to stand between her and her father because I wasn't her real mother. She demanded that he acknowledge my screw-up and force me to apologize to her. When my husband defended me, saying I was perfectly justified in my reaction, she exploded. She called him a coward, a man too scared to stand up to his new wife. She was ashamed, she shrieked, to have a father who wouldn't even defend his own flesh and blood. That's when my husband finally snapped. He told her she was in the wrong, that she didn't need anyone to defend her because she had Pamela, who would support her no matter how monstrous her behavior. And then he said something that was both heartbreaking and brutally honest. He was more ashamed of having a horrible daughter like her than she could ever be of him. At that point, the waterworks started. Both Pamela and Katie began to cry, insisting that I had poisoned him against them, that I had manipulated him into thinking they were terrible people. They were trying to play him, using their tears as a weapon, but he was immune. He had seen this performance too many times before. After 15 minutes of their crocodile tears, Katie called him heartless for not comforting them. She accused him of refusing to take accountability. And then, she played her final, desperate card. She invoked the memory of her dead mother, saying his first wife would be ashamed of how he was treating his family. That was the final detonation. All the years of frustration, of guilt, of sadness, of anger that my husband had been bottling up, came pouring out. He called Katie the worst person he had ever known. He told her that if her mother could see the person she had become, she would have chosen to stay in her grave rather than face the disappointment of having a daughter like her. It was a harsh, brutal thing to say, but given the years of emotional torment they had put him through, I was surprised it hadn't happened sooner. He then turned on Pamela, screaming at her for ruining his daughter, for molding her into the awful, entitled creature she was today. He told her that since she had created this monster, she could take full responsibility for it and leave him out of it. That was when they finally left. That night, my husband and I opened a bottle of our best wine. We didn't celebrate their pain, but we celebrated his liberation. He had finally said everything that needed to be said. He was free. A year has passed since that final, explosive confrontation. Life has been blessedly, beautifully quiet. Katie is still living with Pamela, and they have, thankfully, stayed far away from us. After a few uneventful months, my husband and I decided our quiet life needed a little joyful chaos. Having children was never in the cards for me, but we knew we had a lot of love to give. So, we adopted a dog. He's a 3-year-old golden retriever we rescued from the local shelter, and we named him Bob because it made us laugh. I know you can't compare pets to children, but Bob has filled our home with a kind of uncomplicated, pure happiness that has been profoundly healing. He is our ridiculous, furry, 4-legged son, and we are completely obsessed with him. We post pictures of him constantly. The funniest part of this whole story came a few days ago. A friend of mine who, for some reason, still follows Katie on social media, told me she had tweeted something cryptic about being replaced. We can't prove it, of course, but we're almost certain she was talking about Bob. The thought of this grown woman being jealous of a dog is so pathetic, so utterly hilarious, that I could barely breathe from laughing when I first heard it. The saddest part is that I know my husband would have forgiven her. If she had just shown a single shred of genuine remorse, if Pamela had, for once in her life, encouraged her granddaughter to be a decent human being, I'm sure he would have found a way to let her back into his life. But they didn't. And so he has to live without his only daughter. But he's not alone. He has me, and he has Bob. Our life is good. It's simple, it's peaceful, and it's ours.